You have almost certainly been lied to today. Probably something small, a price tag, a job title, a photo, and you caught it, or you didn't, and either way the day moved on. Now imagine lying so well that a government believes you, that a hospital lets you operate, that a nation sells you a coastline it does not own, or buys one you invented in your head. The strange thing about the greatest con artists in history is not that they were criminals. It is that almost none of them were caught by the lie itself. They were caught by something much smaller. And in one case, the only way out was to prove, in front of a courtroom, that he really was a fraud. These are 8 real people who pulled off things that should have been impossible. And they get worse as we go. Number 8. The woman who invented her own country by accident. In 1929, a young woman wandered into a village in the English county of Gloucestershire wearing a black turban, speaking a language nobody could identify. She refused bread. She prayed to something no one recognized. She could not answer a single question, because no question made sense to her. So the village did what people always do with a mystery. It filled in the blanks. Within weeks, she had been declared Princess Caribou of Javasu, an island in the Indian Ocean, kidnapped by pirates and washed up in England. She was moved into a magistrate's home. She was drawn by artists. Local gentry lined up to meet royalty. Here is the part that should be impossible. A Portuguese sailor arrived and announced that he could speak her language, and he translated her story fluently for the crowd. He was lying too. When the truth finally landed, Princess Caribou turned out to be Mary Baker, a cobbler's daughter from Devon who had invented a language out of nothing and simply refused to break character. She never claimed to be royalty. She never had to. She was fluent in the one thing that actually works, which is silence in the right accent. Number 7. The man who stole a city with a coat. In Tyne Ossels, a shoemaker named Wilhelm Voigt walked into a second-hand shop in Berlin and assembled a Prussian officer's uniform out of mismatched parts. It did not fit properly. The details were wrong. It did not matter. He walked outside, found a group of soldiers on the street, and ordered them to follow him. They followed him. He took them by train to the town of Köpenick, marched them into the town hall, arrested the mayor for suspected corruption, occupied the treasury, and calmly requested the cash on hand. He was handed roughly 4,000 marks. He wrote a receipt. He signed it with the name of a real commanding officer. Then he told the soldiers to hold their positions for half an hour, walked out of the building, and changed his clothes. The twist is what happened afterward. Germany did not treat this as a humiliation. The public loved it so much that the story became a national joke about obedience, and the Kaiser himself reportedly found it funny enough that Voigt was pardoned after less than 2 years in prison. He spent the rest of his life selling signed postcards of himself in uniform. He did not break into the treasury. He was escorted into it by the state for free. Number 6. The daughter of a man who never had a daughter. In the 1890s and early 1900s, banks in Ohio began quietly competing to lend enormous sums to a woman named Cassie Chadwick. She had a secret, and she let it slip carefully, the way you leak something you want repeated. She implied, the illegitimate daughter of Andrew Carnegie, the richest industrialist in America. She never said it loudly. She once arranged to be seen leaving Carnegie's house with a promissory note in her hand. She let a lawyer glimpse documents she said were worth millions. Then she asked him to keep them safe, which is a very effective way of making a document look real. The bankers did the rest. Lending to Carnegie's hidden child was not a risk. It was an introduction. She borrowed what would today be tens of millions of dollars, and she spent it in a way that made the story more convincing, because who spends like that without money behind them? And here is the second reveal. Carnegie never met her. He never signed anything. When the scheme collapsed in 1904, he attended part of her trial as a spectator, apparently curious about the woman who had turned his name into currency without ever speaking to him. Number 15. The man who printed $250 million in a warehouse. Frank Borisa was a Canadian with a very simple observation. Everyone tries to counterfeit money. Almost nobody solves the boring part, which is paper. So he spent years on procurement instead of printing. He hunted down a paper mill willing to produce sheets with the right cotton and linen composition, and then, to solve the security strip, he ordered specialty paper for a fictional business, layer by layer, until he had something a cashier's fingers would accept. By the time he stopped, he had printed around $250 million in fake $20 bills sitting in a storage unit in Quebec. That is the impossible part. Here is the part that is genuinely absurd. He was caught, and he negotiated. He offered to hand over the remaining unsold bills, tens of millions of dollars of them, in exchange for a deal. He served about 6 weeks. Number 4. The surgeon who had never studied medicine. Ferdinand Wado de Mara did not want money. That is what makes him unsettling. He wanted to be someone, and he did not particularly care who. Over about 20 years he worked as a monk, a psychology professor, a prison warden's deputy, a sheriff's deputy, a civil engineer, and a teacher, mostly by borrowing the credentials of real people and then simply being very good at the job. He read fast. He delegated well. He was liked. In Tmi Nami Thing Nami 1, he became Dr. Joseph Cyr, a surgeon in the Royal Canadian Navy, aboard a destroyer during the Korean War. Then wounded soldiers arrived on deck, and one of them needed a bullet removed from near his heart. So he asked for a textbook, went into a room, read, came out, and operated. Every patient survived, and that is exactly what destroyed him. The success was so remarkable that the Navy publicized it. The story reached the real Dr. Joseph Cyr's mother, who read about her son's heroism at sea and knew, immediately, that her son was in New Brunswick. He was not exposed by failure. He was exposed by being too good. Number 3. The farger who had to prove he was a fake to avoid execution. Han van Meegeren was a Dutch painter who was told, repeatedly, that he had no original vision. So he decided to prove the experts wrong by making them adore him without knowing it. He did not copy existing paintings because copies get compared. Instead, he invented paintings that art historians already believed must exist. There was a theory that the Dutch master Vermeer had painted religious scenes in a lost early period. Nobody had ever found one. So he made one. He mixed pigments the way the 17th century did, baked the canvas to harden the paint, and rolled it to crack the surface into a convincing age. The leading Vermeer authority of the era authenticated it as a masterpiece. Then the war came, and Van Meegeren sold one of his invented Vermeers to Hermann Göring, one of the most senior figures in Nazi Germany. After liberation, Dutch investigators traced the sale and arrested him for something far worse than fraud. Selling a national treasure to the enemy was collaboration. The penalty could be death. His only defense was the truth. He had not sold a Dutch masterpiece. He had sold a Nazi leader a worthless painting he made himself in a rented room. Nobody believed him. So he was given a canvas and paint and an audience of witnesses, and he sat in custody and produced another Vermeer in front of them. He was convicted of fargery instead, and in a country still raw from occupation, he became something close to a folk hero, the man who tricked Göring into paying a fortune for nothing. Number 2. The man who sewed the Eiffel Tower, then went back and sewed it again. Victor Lustig read a newspaper article in 1990 complaining that the Eiffel Tower was rusting and expensive to maintain, and that Paris was not sure it was worth keeping. Most people read that as a civic problem. He read it as a listing. He had counterfeit government stationery printed, invited 6 scrap metal dealers to a luxury hotel, and explained, confidentially, that he was a deputy director general of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. The city had decided to demolish the tower. The sale had to stay secret to avoid public outrage. Bids were welcome. He watched the 6-man and picked the one who wanted to belong to something exclusive. That man paid for the tower and then paid a bribe on top of it to make sure he won the contract. And the victim was so embarrassed that he never went to the police, which is why Lustig came back to Paris and ran the entire scheme a second time. His final trick was the one that should have killed him. He had talked his way into a meeting with Al Capone, borrowed a large sum for an investment, kept the money untouched in a safe for 2 months, then returned all of it and apologized for the deal falling through. Capone, moved by such rare honesty, gave him a few $1,000s as a reward for his integrity. That was the actual con. The honesty was the product. Number 1. The man who sold a country that did not exist. Gregor MacGregor was a Scottish soldier who arrived in London in 1822 with a title, a sultan, and a nation. He called it Poyaz, on the coast of Central America. Had described a temperate climate, clean water, fertile soil, a capital city with a cathedral and an opera house, a functioning bank, and untapped gold in the riverbeds. He explained, its cazique, its prince. And he did not just tell the story. He built the paperwork around it. He printed Poyasian banknotes. He published a guidebook by an invented author. He appointed a Poyasian consulate. He sold land titles, and he sold government bonds on the London Exchange, and he encouraged immigrants to exchange their British savings for his currency so they would arrive ready to spend. Hundreds of people boarded ships to a country that had never existed. What they found was jungle. No city, no cathedral, no bank, no settlers waiting to greet them. Just mangrove swamp, mosquitoes, and rain. More than half of the people who sailed there died. And here is the reveal that makes this the worst story on this list. Some of the survivors, brought back to Britain, defended him. They insisted they had been failed by bad agents and bad luck, not by MacGregor himself. He was arrested more than once, tried in France, and released. He eventually moved to Venezuela, was granted a pension as a veteran of its independence wars, and died a respected citizen. He did not steal money. He printed a country, and people paid to move into it. So here is the thing all 8 of these people understood, and it has almost nothing to do with lying. None of them convinced anyone of something strange. They handed people a story that was already sitting in their heads. A uniform means authority. A rich man must have secrets. A missing Vermeer must exist somewhere. A famous landmark must eventually be sold for scrap. A struggling family must be able to start over somewhere green. The con was never the lie. The con was the belief that was already there, waiting. Which is worth remembering the next time something sounds exactly like what you expected to hear. Because that is not proof that it is true. That is just proof that it fits.